The most impressive part of Total War Pharaoh isn't the beautifully detailed map of the Nile Valley, the exciting late Bronze Age setting, or the striking interface that looks like it was copied straight off of a tomb wall in the Valley of Kings. It's the fact that Creative Assembly Sophia has pulled me right back into a fairly traditional historical Total War and made it feel like a fresh experience, even when I've been playing this series for over 20 years now. It has some rough edges, especially the further you get from the heart of Egypt, but that little bit of sand in my sandals is easy to endure when Pharaoh is at its best. Egypt itself is really the star of Total War Pharaoh, and whether you're on the campaign or the battle map, it makes its personality known with wonderful art, effective lighting, and challenging geography. The winding snake of the Nile and the inhospitable deserts on either side strongly shaped every strategic decision I made. Sailing the river itself is by far the fastest way to get anywhere, so sticking close to it is like having access to a superhighway. It cuts both ways though. Especially later on, when the sea people are invading in force, they can swiftly slink upriver to bypass your strongest defenses, which led to some exciting chases to catch them before they could torch the soft underbelly of my empire. On the other end of the spectrum, crossing open desert with no established paths causes appropriately punishing attrition unless you stop and camp regularly, which can slow you down to a crawl. Cleverly, every settlement is connected by roads to somewhere, but on the fringes, you may need to go 2 or 3 provinces north or south to find an ideal route, so speed versus safety was always an interesting consideration. Add in the near constant threat of Libyan invaders in the west, always targeting my hardest to access settlements, and I really felt the welcome pressure I'm looking for in a Total War Grand campaign. Relative to other recent Total Wars, Pharaoh is noticeably more challenging too. I often play on very hard in Warhammer 3, and I found that even stepping it down to hard in this one gave me enough pushback that I had to start 4 or 5 campaigns before I really got a good run going. That's a satisfying balance point. Starting in the south as the Kushite Viceroy Amenmess, the civil wars and foreign invasions bleeding Egypt dry kept me on my toes for more than 100 turns before my snowball, or is it a sandball, got too big to be stopped. I was a bit disappointed by the last huge apocalyptic wave of the Sea People invasion, as I was able to deal with it fairly easily by that point, but to be fair, I had my unfortunate countrymen in Lower Egypt at the mouth of the Nile serving as a filter between me and the sea.
Another step closer to my goals.
Even if the Sea People weren't ruining my day directly, their burning of city centers outside my borders was definitely felt even down in Nubia. The Bronze Age collapse is modeled by a bar that slides from prosperity to crisis to collapse, with stacking bonuses for the invaders and penalties for the settled factions the lower it goes. The idea that I was making my way up the Nile and rebuilding civilization as I went, pulling the world out of a dark age punctuated by eerie changes in sound and lighting, served as a decent motivation to keep pushing even after I'd achieved my standard victory objectives and was too strong to really be challenged. The richness of the campaign is enhanced by what may be the most in-depth set of Empire management mechanics in any Total War so far. There's a whole new layer to every settlement for outposts, which are smaller sub-buildings that can have their own physical location and can be anything from the unique Valley of the Kings monument to a fort that can be staffed with a full stack of defending troops. The latter allowed me to defend some very far-flung areas without needing to station a general, and changed how I approached offensive wars. The ability to build way stations, trading posts, and temples can also create a speedy overland travel network in the developed areas of your empire. but a single raid to knock out one link in the chain may leave your armies stranded. This all speaks to the cleverness and care with which Creative Assembly Sophia has layered more interesting decisions and playstyle choices onto this venerable formula. And that's without even digging into the robust hands-on systems for court politics, civil wars, and earning the favor of the gods. Some of these mechanics are afflicted by a minor plague of bugs, though. I got to use my legacy power, following in the footsteps of Thutmose the Conqueror, only once before it seemed to freeze up and never grant me any rewards for my future victories. One of the powers you unlock after becoming Pharaoh, that's supposed to allow you to forcibly annex smaller factions every 12 turns, simply wasn't usable on anyone, and the tooltip became a blank white box, so I couldn't even figure out why. Influence, which determines how dominant your culture is in a region, is also a very opaque mechanic with inadequate tooltips that can really only be mastered through trial and error. A lot of the best aspects of the campaign only shine brightly if you're playing in Egypt too. To be fair, Egypt itself is a massive, fulfilling canvas to paint the story of your empire upon. In my 120 plus turns as Amenmess, I didn't even reach the borders of Canaan. But the peripheral areas beyond the Sinai Peninsula definitely didn't get the same attention and flavor. It'd be a bit unfair to say that they feel tacked on, but this is definitely a game about Egypt, where everyone else is a side story.
Now I hear rumor of one more brutal than any other. A rising threat by the name of Irsu.
Each region looks just as beautiful and detailed as the Nile. The green mountain valleys of Hati almost feel like a different world when you've been choking on dust in the Sahara for ages. But they also feel cramped and weirdly cut off. For instance, the playable part of Anatolia slices off the western and northern coasts of the peninsula, which just feels awkward and unnatural. Even in Egypt's case, I wouldn't say the spot they chose to end the map in the south makes much sense, missing the ancient city of Meroe that was hugely important to the Kingdom of Kush, which features prominently in Egyptian politics. And having a game about the Late Bronze Age that doesn't include the Mesopotamian heavy hitters like Assyria, Elam, and Babylon, just off the edge of Pharaoh's map, gives the whole epic an aftertaste of incompleteness. I genuinely hope we get some DLC that takes us a bit further east. The outer regions also lack the political richness of Egypt. For example, the Hittites only have 2 playable characters and 2 ancient legacies to pursue, compared to Egypt's 4 and 4. That means there are really only 4 different main play styles for them, compared to Egypt's 16, since you can mix and match any legacy with any character. Shupalilumia is a punishingly difficult but interesting run as you try to salvage a collapsing kingdom, but I never got over the feeling of being boxed in by the weird map borders. And the geography of Anatolia doesn't create the same interesting strategic puzzle as Egypt. At least every faction has a wide roster to pull from, and the many cultures sprinkled across the world each offer something different. The Hittites are the masters of the heavily armored infantry line. Kush and Nubia have by far the best archers. Even within Egypt and Hati, there are multiple subcultures with their own native units, which can be recruited simply by owning a settlement in the right area, regardless of which faction you are. This allows building multi-ethnic armies that combine the strengths of many tribes, which is thematically and tactically satisfying. The pacing of the battles is great too, with infantry engagements slowed down noticeably from other recent Total Wars. I always prefer it that way, since it allows more room to maneuver and make small clutch plays to eke out a win. Unit weight classes mix up the typical rock, paper, scissors dynamic of swords, spears, and bows, with light but fast infantry often able to chase down and overwhelm units that are more powerful on papyrus. The fact that armor can now be worn down and damaged throughout a battle gives a new role to club and mace units, as they specialize in exactly that. And the addition of weather effects like thunderstorms and sandstorms is not only visually awesome, but can turn the tide for one side or another. Chariots are still chariots. The amount of micro they require, like in past Total Wars, makes them generally not worth using at all. How would you fix this? I'm not sure, but until they do, I'd almost always rather have one more unit of infantry that I don't have to babysit nearly as much. Total War Pharaoh looks incredible, with diverse and interesting battles complemented by an uncommonly deep and rich campaign layer. The focus is firmly on Egypt, and the experiences available outside that region don't really match up in terms of content or quality, but when I'm sailing up and down the majestic Nile River, fending off invasions from hostile tribes, politicking my way to the top of the power pyramid, and sending my besandaled soldiers to spill blood across the shining sands, I feel confident in saying that historical Total War is back, baby. For more, check out our reviews of Assassin's Creed Mirage or Wargroove 2. And for everything else, stick with IGN.